Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H Virtual Event Space. I am your host, Derek Fosmunder, back with Sony Artisan of Imagery, Tony Gale, who is joining us for the second part of his three-part series, talking about taking your photography business, making it, taking it to another level. And today we're talking about marketing. Last week we talked about getting your business started. And today Tony's going to be sharing his tips, tricks, and information for getting your business out there. So first of all, I'd like to thank our sponsor for today's event, Sony. So what do you got for us today, Tony?
Part two of the business of photography, we're going to go over marketing.
Awesome. So Tony, take it away.
All right, thank you very much. Hi, everybody. As Derek just said, today I'm going to be going over the business of photography, part 2 of 3, marketing. As I said last week, and I'll say again next week, we are going over a lot in a short period of time. Even with 3 sessions, the business of photography is a big topic. So there are things that just won't get covered, but we'll do our best. I want to thank Sony for sponsoring this again and the B&H Event Space for having me again. Always a pleasure. I am a Sony Artisan of Imagery. I'm also a Manfrotto Ambassador and X-Rite Colorati and the APA National President. I primarily shoot people in portraits for a variety of editorial, corporate, and advertising clients. And as I say on many of my talks, we are in a very exciting time to be a photographer. The business in some ways is more difficult than it used to be, but the business is also in many ways easier to break into. It's easier to become a professional photographer, which is part of what makes it more difficult for some people because there's more people vying for that piece of the pie. But for all of you who want to be paid to do your photography, the barrier to entry is lower. It's easier now. It wasn't as easy 20 years ago or 40 years ago. The tools we have available are incredible, and we can do things that just weren't possible. We can take pictures and adjust on the fly. We can see what we're getting and adjust, change the color, change the white balance, change the exposure, all sorts of things that with film, we just couldn't do as easily. We have great things like the Alpha 1 that I believe is supposed to start shipping tomorrow. I hope it does. I'm waiting for one. 30 frames a second, super fast autofocus. The tools we have now are incredible. All right, business of photography. We're going to go over marketing and quickly talk about marketing plans. One of the things, anytime any photographer speaks, myself included, is that there will be things that someone thinks I omitted, and they could be right, or disagrees with, they could be right. There is no one right answer for everything. So take anything I say, whatever's useful to you, use it. If you think it's the dumbest idea ever, it probably isn't the dumbest idea ever, but you might have a better one. That's fantastic. Go for it. But hopefully this will be helpful. All right. The first thing with marketing and your business, last week we talked about what kind of photography you want to do, how you want to start your business. For marketing, you need to think about who are you marketing to. We'll get into more detail on that. But if you're a commercial photographer, if you're trying to reach advertising agencies, you probably want to typically reach out to art producers or art buyers. If you want to shoot for companies, maybe the director of marketing. If you want to shoot for magazines, it could be the photo editor. If you want to shoot for, weddings or family portraits, that gets a little more complicated because you're not looking for someone with a title. But think about who you're marketing to, because all of your marketing needs to be directed at whatever audience that is. If your audience is companies, you're marketing to companies. If it's regular people, you're marketing to regular people. You want to think about what that is. And as you're marketing, you want to think about how wide your audience is. So here on the left, we have the 12 to 24 G Master, super wide angle lens. You can see a lot. If you're looking through that, you're marketing to a huge swath of people, but nobody specifically. You're pointing at everyone, that person, that person, that person, maybe 1,000 people, 10,000 people, 100,000 people. You're putting your message out there to everyone. 2470 G Master, you're focused in a little bit more. It's still not really narrow, but you're a little bit more focused. Not everyone, just people kind of in the middle. Or you could have the 70 to 200 G Master where you're very focused. 200 millimeters right down the middle, just these handful of people. As you're marketing, think about which of those it is. Are you wide angle? Are you in the middle? Are you narrow? There's pros and cons to each, and we'll talk about some reasons to do each of those. But just be aware of what you're doing. If your message is going to a lot of people, it can't be, it needs to be a little bit broader of a message. If you think about a commercial you might see on broadcast television, it needs to reach a broader audience than a commercial you might see on some crazy cable channel that only 6 people watch. So think about that. Are you wide angle 12 to 24? Are you 70 to 200? Are you in between? And you don't have to be just one of those, but different marketing silos could be uh, hitting each of those categories. All right. So some of the marketing elements that we're going to quickly go over, only because there's only so much time. Your website, social media, other websites, not yours, but other people's websites or other companies' websites, networking, email, portfolio reviews and meetings, photo contest, grants, which again, I want to thank the person who brought that up last week. I would not have included grants this week if it weren't for that question. Promo cards, other promos, and etc. This is not every type of marketing that could exist. There's essentially an infinite amount of marketing that you could do. These are the ones that I think of as the first ones to start with, and probably don't start with all of these all at once. If you think of marketing, it's sort of a cloud, right? There's just a lot of stuff. Where do you start? You can't do everything at once, probably. If you can, more power to you. So if you're looking at this and thinking this is a lot, I don't know where to begin, I'm confused. I think your website, social media, and networking are the 3 most important things to focus on at the beginning. When I have a podcast, the Sony Alpha Photographers Podcast, in it, I sometimes ask photographers I interview how they find their clients. About 70% say it's networking and word of mouth is how they get most of their clients. So that's very important. Your website, very important, because if someone just knows your name, that's how they're going to find you. They're going to find your website. Social media is good because it's a broad swath. You can show a lot of pictures to a lot of people. There are people who make real careers out of doing well on Instagram, for example. Those are the 3 that I would say focus on first. All right. So your website is wide angle, right? Because anybody in the world can look at your website if they have a smartphone or a computer. Somebody in Japan, somebody in the UK, somebody in South Africa, somebody in Thailand, somebody in Peru. Any of those people can look at your website and find you. So it's a wide net. It's a wide angle lens. You're looking at a lot. One of the first things I would say with a website is use a custom URL. Mine is tonygale.com, for example. If you are starting out, there's a tendency to go with one of the websites that might offer you a free website, and it might be, who'sy what's it / Tony Gale. That tends to not look as professional as whatever URL you pick, a custom URL. Obviously, if you have a common name, it gets harder. There are a bunch of Tony Gales. I just happened to buy it in the year 2000 or 99 before everybody had a website, so I got fortunate. If your name isn't available, maybe it's Tony Gale Photo or tonygale.net or whatever. Or if you're somebody who shoots weddings or portraits, you might want another kind of name, magicalphotos.com, or that's probably taken, but you might want something like that. If you are a commercial photographer, I would suggest that you avoid a name that isn't your name. If you are wedding portraits, there might be merit to it, especially if you're a wedding photographer, because a lot of people over time start sort of subcontracting weddings. So one person comes in, they can't afford you, the main photographer, or you're booked that weekend, but you have other photographers that work for you and you send them out. So you may want to use a name that's not just your name. There's a lot of options. But whatever it is, pick a custom URL. Don't just go with one of the free websites. Think about how it's designed. Think about your categories. I used a consultant to help me with this. If you have the money and the time, consultants can be very helpful. The consultant suggested portraits, personalities, athletes, and at work, even though they're all really portraits. Sometimes getting a fresh set of eyes or a different opinion can be helpful. I also have an about page. I think that's very important, and I've been told that when I've had meetings. It's my bio, it gives it a little personality, it allows people to get to know who I am a little bit. If someone's looking to hire you, if they can look at your about page and say, "Oh, Derek does mountain biking. That's cool. I like mountain biking." That gives them a way to sort of personalize it and know a little bit more about you, and it separates you from everybody who doesn't do mountain biking. It's an important page. I would include it. I sometimes see people that have an about page and there's really no information. Personalize it. Don't do anything crazy, but personalize it. I have a clients and awards page so that it gives me some credibility. People can see that I've worked for specific people, awards I've won. We'll talk about photo contests in a little bit. Projects is various personal projects that I've done to sort of keep them together. Blog, we'll talk about that in a little bit. Not everybody should do a blog, and a contact page. I also have social media stuff down there. It's important to have a contact page. The number of websites I've seen that don't have a contact page is alarming. It should also have where you live. We all want to say we could work anywhere, and we could most of the time, maybe not right now. But clients don't necessarily care unless they really, really like you. If they're looking for somebody in New York, it's important that it's clear that I'm in New York. If they're looking for somebody in Tucson, it's important that your website says Tucson if that's where you live. Also on the contact page, if you only have a form to fill out without a direct email, some people just won't bother. My website has both. If they want to fill out a form, they can. If they want to click on the email link, they can do that too. Some people do fill out the form. I don't know why. You also want to make sure that whatever website you're using is dynamic. What that means is if the window changes size, your images and everything else changes with it. So you can see I made the window smaller. Everything gets smaller, make this window bigger, everything gets bigger. If they have a big screen, the pictures look big. If they have a small screen, the pictures look small. You want that to be dynamic. Almost everything now should be, but if what you have isn't, really consider switching. And of course, you want to make sure it's mobile friendly. You want to make sure that your website shows up well on somebody's phone. This is on my Xperia 1 or on their tablet so that they're not just looking on a computer. About 40% of the statistics of people who look at my website are on mobile, some sort of mobile device, not on a computer. You want it to look good for that. It also will matter for Google SEO. All right, now speaking of SEO, PhotoShelter has a great guide to SEO. I'm not really going to go into it, in part because it changes constantly. The Google algorithm changes a lot. All of that changes a lot. It's worth looking into. It's worth paying attention to. I'm not going to explain it. I will, however, say emails like this, which I get at least a few times a week, should be ignored. This person, for $50 a month, they'll plan for 50 keywords and bring me to on Google's top results. That's probably not going to happen. First of all, nobody can guarantee top results on Google because it has to do with how everybody else is running SEO. A reputable place could help you, but anybody who says they will bring you that should be ignored. Mostly just ignore these. This is only here as an example of what I don't think is worth paying attention to. It's easy to think $50 a month, that seems worth it to try. It's not worth it. All right, should you have a blog? Maybe. I have one. I'm not great at keeping it up, and I try. I have seen a lot of people's websites. I looked at one the other day where I clicked on the blog. It hadn't been updated since 2014. If you're not going to update your blog, I wouldn't include it. If someone clicks on the blog because they're curious and the last post was 3 years ago, that's a negative impression. It's better to just not have it listed at all than to have a blog that you're not updating at least somewhat regularly. But for the people that do update it regularly, it can help with SEO. It's another place people can look. It's another way to get a sense of your personality. It just depends on what works for you. And for a lot of people, social media sort of functions in that way. So maybe. The answer is maybe. All right. Now, networking, the second of the three most important things, in my opinion. Networking, it's not as wide as your website, but it's not as narrow as what we're going to get to in a minute, or as what we're going to get to in a little bit. Networking is sort of in between. Networking is you're going to an event where other people might be and just talking to people. I will suggest, and we could do a whole thing on networking, that the best way to network is to not worry about what someone can do for you. It's just to meet people. That's all it is. You're just meeting people. Maybe they can help you get work. Maybe not. Maybe you can help them get work. Maybe not. Maybe it's just someone you met. But if you are the person that goes into a room and is only looking for the person that can hire you, and as soon as you start a conversation and learn they can't hire you, you leave, people can see that and nobody wants to talk to you. The best way to network is to see what you can bring to it. How can I help the people I meet? How can I meet more people? And if you get work, that's great. And eventually you will. People will know you, people will like you, everything will work out, but you need to be open and willing to help other people too, not just looking for how people can help you. And it is, of course, a bit challenging at the moment. There are things, a friend of mine does something where called Lunch Club, where he has a random, I think it's a Zoom call with someone every week. He puts in criteria, they just meet. It's a way to just converse with people. There's things like that. A lot of them are free. Hopefully soon, and I am optimistic it will be soon, as more people get the vaccine, there will be more in-person events and more opportunities to network in person, but it is a bit challenging at the moment. All right, social media. Social media is also very wide, sort of like your website, because anybody with a computer and an account can see it. Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, Clubhouse is all the rage these days. TikTok, Twitter, there's a ton of stuff. If you're someone who is already familiar with all this, just take a nap for a second. If you're someone who finds social media intimidating, I would suggest picking one, focusing on that. And once you're really consistent and comfortable with that, you can move on to another one. Something like Instagram does better if you post consistently and if you interact with people consistently. If you post on Instagram today and then in a month and a half, it's not as useful. The same with Facebook, LinkedIn, all of them, consistency is key. So whichever one you can be consistent is where I would start. And then once you're comfortable with that, you can think about adding another one. I post to Instagram almost every day. If you have a business account, you can schedule it through the Facebook Creators Suite, I think it's called, and you can schedule posts. So it's an easy way to be consistent. There are third-party apps that will help you with that, but some of them don't really follow the rules, so it can be tricky. Also think about what you're going to post. I have recently switched to mostly portraits with some landscapes and other stuff just because I like it. But I'll also post pictures of cameras because it's fun. And it also shows people that I'm doing things. It keeps people aware that I'm out there in the world. One of the things with anything is people want to work with the person who seems like they're doing stuff and not the person who's sitting in a corner and moping, even though we all sit in the corner and mope sometimes. We all have bad days. But you want to be seen as, oh, yeah, this person's out there doing stuff. Let me call that person. Facebook, one of the things I do on Facebook, even though I haven't been to an in-person photo event in a year, is when I go to an event, I take selfies with people. Yes, I know selfies are cliche. I have been doing it for like 12 years, so I was at the early edge of it. But it's to the point now where people want me to do it. And if I take a picture and post it on Facebook and tag them, all of my friends see it, all of their friends see it. It's just a way to remind people that you exist. And one of the things I think is important in marketing and in business is I want people to not hire me on purpose if they're not going to hire me. I don't want them to not know I exist. I want them to think, I'm the wrong person for the job or the right person for the job, not I would be the right person for the job if only they knew I was there. So I want as many people as possible to know I'm there, and then they can choose to hire me or not. All right. There's also other website listings besides your website, most of which are paid. APA, if you're an APA member, obviously as the APA national president, I'm a big proponent of APA, has Hire an APA Pro. If you're a member, it's a free profile that you put up. People can search by location or name or what have you and look for photographers. Most of the other trade organizations do that as well. ASMP does. I believe PPA does. I'm not sure about NPPA. They probably do, but I'm not sure. So if you join a trade organization, that's an instant way to do that. I use also something called Found Folios that I pay for. There's a lot of stuff. There's Wonderful Machine, there's Photopolitic, there's Boulevard Artist, there's Workbook, there's a million things. These all are primarily for commercial and editorial photographers, and they all have their pros and cons. You have to look at both your budget and what makes sense to you. If you're a wedding photographer, there's sites like The Knot or Wedding Wire. Same thing, you can pay to be listed. Does it make sense? Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. A lot of them, it depends on where you live and what you can afford. I know people who've gotten a lot of work from these sites, and I know people that think they're not worth it at all. It's very subjective. If you're a fine art photographer and you're trying to figure it out, there are things like Art Storefront, Saatchi Art, Pickfair. I haven't used any of these, just like I haven't used The Knot or Wedding Wire, so I can't speak to any of them. But they're all out there. I don't know what they cost, but if I were heavy into fine art, I would probably have a profile in all three and a way for people to find my work. It's something to think about. If you're just creating beautiful photographs at home and nobody sees them, nobody's going to buy them. One of the things I sometimes see client side people say is that don't worry about marketing, just make great work and we'll find you. I don't think that's true. Making great work is important, but you have to get it out there. If nobody's going to find you if there's no way for them to see it. It's important to get it out there. There's also things like web advertising, Instagram ads, Google ads, Facebook ads. I think these kinds of advertising work better for people that are doing weddings or family portraits, things like that. For the most part, I think with editorial and corporate photographers, advertising photographers, your clients aren't going to be looking in these places, but maybe not. Corporate photography, especially, can be weird. People will reach out to me who are the executive assistant of the vice president of widgets because they need pictures. Like, it's no one that I would ever be able to find and market to because it's just somebody. And they might find you because of this. But mostly, I think business to consumer that we talked about last week. You're a wedding photographer, you photograph senior portraits, you photograph family portraits, you photograph, people's parties. I think that's where these kind of advertising are more likely to do you well. And one of the good things about all of these is you can set a budget. You can say, I have $20 total, run it for a week, and see how it goes. Try it and see. Watch your web analytics. Did people come? Did people click through? See what happens. All right. Now, as we talked about, who are you marketing to? You have to find the people you want to market to. If you're an editorial or commercial photographer, there are services that will help you. You have to pay for them. So I use Agency Access. There's also a site called Yoda List. There's also a site called Bikini List. I don't know why that's their name. I have only used Agency Access. I really like Agency Access, but somebody likes each of these and somebody doesn't like each of these. One common problem you'll find is that as people change jobs, these lists are sometimes a little behind because if somebody lost their job yesterday, there's no way for these services to know it. They do reach out and make phone calls and try and verify jobs and positions on a regular basis. So if someone lost their job 6 months ago, they're going to know about it, but not yesterday. All of these services, like I said, it costs money. You pay either monthly or annually. It's also important that when you buy these lists, you only have access to the list while you're paying for it. So if you download this list and then 2 years from now you still have that download and you want to use it, that's technically not in the terms of service. You're not following the rules. It's also, if it's 2 years old, not a good list anymore. A lot of those people won't be at those jobs anymore. Whether or not this makes sense to you, hard to say. I started out by trying to make my own list. I would call ad agencies and ask for a creative roster. I would go to newsstands, go to Barnes and Noble, look at all the magazines, write down the names of all the photo editors. That list, I had about 150 people, and every few months, at least 20% of them had switched jobs. It was so much work to keep that list up that it's just easier to pay. But does it make sense for you? You'll have to decide. Most of them will do a free period of time, a couple of weeks or something. If you use one, so say agency access, you can do a search by keyword, you can search by the contact type, company type, the role, lots of different things. So I could search for art producers at ad agencies, and it will bring me up a list of art producers at ad agencies. I can then filter by saying only ad agencies that do sports, and filter it down. So there you go, art producers, art directors, copywriters. You probably don't want to market to copywriters as a photographer. If you shoot weddings, you might look at wedding trade shows. So this was just a Google search I did the other day. There's a whole bunch in the New York area. A lot of people will buy booths at a trade show because most of the people coming to a wedding trade show are people who are planning on getting married in the next however long. They got engaged, they want to go meet vendors. It's a way for you to get your name out there, especially when you're first starting out, if no one knows who you are. Some people think it's great, some people don't. It's up to you. Because as a wedding photographer or portrait photographer, family portrait photographer, there aren't specific people to market to, because really your audience is the whole world, except for the people that are already married, or unless they have kids who are going to get married. It's complicated. But it's not an easy thing to just send 5,000 emails to those people, whereas for advertising, I could send 5,000 emails. So just getting out there is a good thing. Speaking of 5,000 emails, there are mass emails. So there are a bunch of services that can help you. MailChimp, Emma, Sendinblue, Constant Contact. I've used some of these, not all of them. If you're going to use a service like this, you need to own your email. You can create a page on your website where people can register for your email list, but you're not supposed to use a list that you got from, say, Agency Access or Yoda List and import those emails into here. That's against the terms of service. So you have to be careful if you're going to use a service like this. The best emails are the ones where people opt in and want to get your emails, but just be careful of that. Some of these services are also very cheap or free if your list is small. So if you're building your own list, it's a way to do it. And if you're a wedding portrait photographer, that's a great way to get emails, is figure out a way to just get people to opt in, maybe offer some little thing, and use one of these services. I do not use those services now. I just do it through Agency Access as well. Emails don't get opened a ton. You can see the last two I sent. The last one was opened by just under 13% of people who got it, but only 1.3%, 1.28% of them clicked through to my website. The one before, 8% opened, but 8.5% clicked through to my website. So it depends. But that's not a lot. These went to 3,000 or 4,000 people each. Of those 3,000 or 4,000, these percentages click through. It's better than nothing. One of the advantages of doing this is you can send it to everybody you can think of, and some of them will like your work and some of them won't. But if you really, really, really want to work with someone specifically, you really, really, really want to work with Nike, you find the director of marketing at Nike. I assume there's a director of marketing at Nike. If you can find their email and send them a personal email and send them some pictures, explain why you love Nike, why you want to work for them, that's more likely to get opened than a mass email that goes to 4,000 people. The advantage of the one going to 4,000 people is I can send it to 4,000 people. I can't write a personal email to 4,000 people. I mean, I guess theoretically I could, but not in a way that's actually personalized, where you're talking about why you love that company and why you want to work for them and why you're the perfect fit. So doing both has value. Send that email to everybody under the sun, and then reach out to the people you really, really, really want to work for and tell them you really want to work for them and why you're a good fit. Maybe pitch an idea. So don't discount personal email. It has a lot of value. Then there's in-person meetings. In-person meetings are very much that long Zoom, that 70 to 200, because an in-person meeting is you're trying to get a meeting with one person, sometimes a whole team, but one person. You're going to bring your portfolio or your iPad with some pictures on it and sit down and have a conversation. If you can make it happen, it's a great thing. It is a bit tricky at the moment still. In New York City, for example, almost no one is in their office and no one is going to meet with you in person. They're just not. There's no reason for them to do it. Things are, with everything happening in the world with COVID, it's not going to happen right now, but it will happen in the future. And if you can make that happen, it's the best thing. If someone can hire you because they've met you, as opposed to someone whose work is just as good, but they haven't met, if they've met you and they like you, they're going to go with you because they know you. Anything you can do to make it so that someone knows you and can relate to you and trust you, that's good. And an in-person meeting is a great way to do that. It's also a great way to just build that rapport and learn more about them, so that when you send them more marketing, uh, you can send them exactly what they want. We really love pictures of elephants, but only Asian elephants. We don't really like African elephants, or only African elephants. We don't really like Asian elephants. I know they're two different things. I couldn't tell you what the differences are. Whatever it is, if you know exactly what they want, you can focus on that. There's also portfolio reviews. So a portfolio review is a little bit like speed dating sometimes, depending on how it's set up. You might meet a bunch of people in a short period of time for a few minutes each. APA, I'm sure ASMP tends to do portfolio reviews. Right now, it's all virtual. It's all online. APA-LA is doing one 2 days ago, actually, but it was sold out. It's a great way to get your work in front of people, and right now, it's the closest you're going to get to seeing people in person, because typically it's done via Zoom. So you've got that two-way communication with the camera, and then you're scrolling through your pictures and they can talk. With a portfolio review, you're usually paying for it. You're not typically paying to meet someone in person if you just called them up and said, "Hey, I'm Tony Gale. I'm a photographer in New York. I photograph people in portraits. I'd love to come in and show you some of my work. Do you have any time next week?" You're not going to pay for that. You might bring some snacks. People like snacks, but you're not paying for that. For portfolio review organized by someone else, you typically are. The Palm Springs Photo Festival has portfolio reviews. Typically they do it in Palm Springs at the event. They're also doing some virtual ones, so that's worth looking at. New York City Photo Works, even though it says NYC Photo Works, it's all over, is also doing online portfolio reviews. You can see 25 minutes via Zoom. With some of these, you're going to have to be vetted. So if you want to do a portfolio review, you're going to have to send them your website, and they're going to say yes or no to whether or not you can even opt into it. If they tell you no, hopefully they tell you why. It's going to be a drag. You're going to feel disappointed and upset that they said no. It's okay. We're all going to be told no more than yes as a photographer. When we're reaching out to people, most of the time they're going to say no. Do you have time next week for a meeting? I really don't. Do you have time next month for a meeting? I really don't. Most of the people are going to say no. You just keep trying. If you reach out to one of these and they say no, Take whatever reason they said no to, think about it, decide if you agree with it, and if you do, adapt and change. If you're a fine art photographer, there's things like Photo Lucida. There's a bunch of things like that. All right. Trying to go through a lot. Photo contests. I mentioned photo contests. My website says the awards I've won. Photo contests can be a really good way to get your work out there, both because if you win, you get to say award winning. That's always good. Most people don't care what the award is. Some of the awards, like Communication Arts or the American Photography Book, get distributed to potential clients. You also have the chance to get your work in front of judges that you might want to work for. Usually the judging is blind, but afterwards, if somebody's work was something that really spoke to them, they can always ask. However, there are a lot of photo contests that are not good. Always look at the terms and conditions. So I found this online. Obviously, I blocked out the company. This photo contest has a little checkbox that you read and agree with the copyright transfer. Then you click on it. It says you're assigning and transferring all rights to the work that you're uploading. So you took a picture that you love enough that you think it could win a contest. You upload it to this contest, you no longer own it. You're transferring all rights, title, and interest in the copyright to this organization. It's not your picture anymore. That's not worth it. It doesn't matter what you could win in that contest. It's not worth it. Always check the terms. This contest says that you're letting them put it on their website and Facebook page and other things to talk about their contest and talk about their organization. That's better. They're saying they're always going to give you credit, that you retain ownership. That's a better contest. Most of the contests that are really aimed at professional photographers are going to have better terms. A lot of contests done by organizations and companies that are aimed at amateurs are going to have bad terms. Whatever it is, always check. It's really important. You do not want to lose the copyright to your work because you might win $100 worth of widgets. It's not worth it. Even $1,000 worth of widgets, it's not worth it. So always check the terms and conditions. Some of the contents I like, but of course your mileage may vary. Communication Arts, American Photography Book, the Sony World Photo Awards, the International Photography Awards, the APA Awards, obviously is the APA president. There's also, if you're a wedding portrait photographer, WPPI and PPA tend to have contests. So that's worth looking at. All of these I think are worth looking at. You have to decide. I know people that will swear up and down that contests aren't worth it. Most of the time you enter and you do not win unless you're amazing. If you enter and win most of the time, then you're awesome. Well done. Most of us, we enter a lot, spend a lot of money, rarely get in. I still think it's worth it. All right. And then somebody last week asked about grants. So there are grants that are both photo specific and grants that are business specific. FedEx right now has one that the deadline is tomorrow, which is why I didn't include it. It's a $50,000 grant. You have to do a bunch of stuff with a deadline of tomorrow. I say go for it, but it's probably too late. There are things like Sony has 3 years in a row now done the Alpha Female program. The first 2 times it was an artist in residence. This last time it was the Alpha Female Plus program where they had 12 grant winners. I think it was every 2 weeks for 24 weeks. The grant winners got money to do a project. They got a camera and a lens. They got a lot of support. I don't know what the plan is for this in the future. They've done it 3 years in a row. I hope that they do it again, but nothing's been announced. And until it's announced, nothing exists. So I don't know if it's happening or not. But keep an eye out. And if you are looking at that and saying it's alpha female and I'm not a female, you can enter no matter what. Your project needs to involve women and females in some way. You'd have to read the rules, but you don't have to be a woman to enter. It's a really great program. I really love that Sony does it. There should be more women in photography than there are. Adobe has the Adobe Creative Residency. It's a way you can get financial support. It varies with what it is. That's worth looking at. It's also with the Adobe Creative Residency. I was speaking to someone I know who works for Adobe who mentioned that when they're looking for photographers to work with, to pay money to, this is where they're most likely to look first because they've met you. Just like we talked before, in-person meeting is great because someone's met you and knows you, and they're more likely to call you than someone they haven't spoken to. Same thing here. There's also a bunch of other resources. So the New York City Office of Cultural Affairs has a bunch of information about artist grants and fellowships provided by local arts councils. NYFA, the New York Foundation for the Arts, has a bunch of awards and grants listed. And then this is something I've always thought was cool, but you have to have a pretty flexible life. The National Park Service has artist in residence programs where you get to go to a park and live there for some period of time, a couple of weeks, a month, and just work on your art, work on whatever it is you do. I think that's awesome. I wish I could do it, but I'm just not sure I could leave for 2 weeks and not be able to. Some of them, you're somewhere with no phone service. If a client calls, I need to answer that call. And if you're wondering, is there anything near where I live? This is a map of all their residency programs. They're all over the place. It's super cool. That the lowest dot there on the right is Grand Tortugas National Park, off about 70 miles off of Key West. It looks super awesome. No cell service, but it looks so cool. So that's something to consider too. Just a way to focus on your work. All right, moving along. Promo cards, the classic marketing thing. Promo cards. I have that one on the left. That's a really old one of mine. I do bigger ones now. They're really relatively inexpensive. I use them as leave behind. So if I have a meeting, I'll leave a packet of promo cards. I mail them, although not so much now because, again, if I mail it to someone's office, they're not going to be there. But it's a great opportunity. It's relatively inexpensive. I can get 500 5x7 cards or 1,000 5x7 cards for less than $100. Uh, it's worth having, even if you just print 50 or 100, so that when you meet someone or someone expresses interest in your work, you've got something to hand them. Business cards are good too, but people like to see pictures. There's also things like other promos. So I have done, for example, twice now, a promo where I made cookies. I made 6 chocolate chip cookies and 6 butterscotch chip cookies. I included photos. I included a little thing of chocolate milk. And I brought that to ad agencies and magazines across New York and shipped some all over the country. First one I did was in a plastic lunchbox, but then they stopped making that. So this is an insulated lunch bag. This is not inexpensive. It wasn't crazy expensive. It probably cost me maybe $8 a piece, for everything. But people really notice. One of the things is I shared it on social media. People comment, so more people see it. I've had people email me a year later, 2 years later, to say they're still using the lunch bag to bring their lunch to work. It's something that they can use. It's got utility. There's a lot of value to that, but you can only do so much. With the lunch bags, I did about 100 over a year. With the lunch boxes, I did 32 over a few months. Think about more creative ways. People like cookies. People like things they can use. There's also things like this. Found does these decks where I think it's 100 photographers buy in. You have to pay for it. They print everybody's pictures. They package them together. They send it to clients. So you're in sort of a miniature booklet that's not bound. Lots of people can see it. It looks really cool. There are source books. A source book, mostly for commercial and editorial photographers, is a book with your work and a bunch of other people's work that gets sent to potential clients all over the country or world. Some of them are very expensive. This is the APA source book. If you're an APA member, the pro or leader level, it's a free page. Workbook has them. The book, there's a bunch of stuff out there. Whether or not this makes sense is very particular. It's one of those things, you put it out there, maybe something happens, maybe it doesn't. Typically, if something happens once every few years, it's worth it. because what you could get for that really great job where they called you because of it offsets it, but it's really something to think about. None of us are made of money, I think. So you really have to think about it. And with marketing in general, sometimes it's like throwing money into a black hole. You just have no idea what's happening. You do all this, nothing happens. And then a year later, somebody that got that first postcard you mailed calls you for a project. It's not something where you should expect instant results most of the time. I printed booklets. All right. So we're quickly just going to go over a marketing plan and then see what questions there may be. So the marketing plan is you've got your wide, you've got your medium zoom, you've got your long zoom, you've got a little bit of everything. Think about what are your marketing goals? What do you hope to accomplish with your marketing? More work, obviously, but the more specific you can be, the better. Think about what your value proposition is. What are you as a photographer bringing to your potential clients that would make them want to work with you? We're all hopefully competent photographers. So is it that you have really great customer service, that you create photographs in a different way? Whatever it is, think about that. You should always have really great customer service, though. That's important. Who are you trying to reach? We talked about that. Look at what other photographers that are in your peer group are doing. If you're a wedding photographer, look at what other wedding photographers are doing. Fine art photographer, look at what other fine art photographers are doing. Commercial photographer, look at what they're doing. It doesn't mean you need to do those things. Sometimes looking what everybody else is doing says, they're all doing that, so I'm going to do this. Sometimes that works, but you want to be aware of it so that you can make an informed decision. Look at what the marketing you're doing now is, and then look at how you can improve that marketing. I'm sending this number of emails. It's not really working. How can I change it to perhaps get more success? Come up with a timeline and a schedule. Consistency is important. If you send somebody an email 4 times a year, every quarter, it's better than this month and next month and then in a year. Consistency is important. And then think about how will you measure success? What does success mean? If I send an email, if I get 5 responses, is that success? If I get 1, if people click on my website, is that success? What is success? I mean, obviously, getting work is success, but it's not always that one-to-one. It's not always that obvious. But think about that marketing plan. All right, and these are the same resources I went over last week to help as you go forward. Alpha Universe has some great articles on business, alphauniverse.com. You can just search for business. APA website, lots of great stuff. Wonderful Machines member blog, a photo editor, photo shelters guides, the APA business manual, best practices for photography, Maria Piscopo's book on marketing, APA, S&P, NPPA, PPA. All right. We'll see if anybody has any questions. We went over a lot of stuff.
That is a lot of stuff. They're probably all still digesting it, Tony.
It's all a blur. They're still dizzy.
Well, everybody take note of how you can find Tony. So if you do have a question that we don't get to, you don't think of it, you can contact him here and, of course, follow his work. Let's start it off with a question from Tom on Facebook asking, where do you find potential clients? In this day and age, where's the best place to go?
What kind of work does Tom want to do? That's the question. I mean, so I went over some of those. I'm not sure when that question came in. You can pay for a list service. If what you do is business to consumer, letting everybody you know that you're a photographer, maybe offering a referral. So let's say you're a wedding photographer. If somebody refers a wedding to you, you get 5%. They get 5% or whatever. A lot of people do stuff like that. But look at where the work that you want to create is being used. And then once you know where it's being used, look at who's using it and figure out how to reach those people. If sports is what you love to photograph, look at who's using sports imagery and then find who is in charge of that imagery.
Now, I know you touched on this, Tony, but a couple things that I guess always come into the conversation are, you talked about emailing, if you want to work for Nike or do a job for Nike, reaching out. What has changed over the last 5, 10, 15, 20 years as far as are people still going out, printing up actual portfolios and bringing them to creative directors? Is everything virtual now?
Well, right now everything is virtual.
Other
Um,
pre-pandemic, in this day and
I
age.
I have a printed portfolio. So when I go to a meeting, I bring my printed portfolio and I bring an iPad with a bunch of more pictures organized by category. Most people I meet appreciate a printed portfolio still. There's something about the tactile thing of looking through actual prints, actual images, looking through pages. People like that. I think it makes you look a little bit more polished as long as the prints are really good and the portfolio is not beat up. And
Okay,
I
not
think
a,
a lot of people still do that. It's like even for weddings, people like to look at wedding albums, right? They like
definitely.
the idea of that thing that's going to be on the shelf showing that they had this really expensive wedding where everybody looked great, 20 years ago. People enjoy that.
Okay, so Kat is joining us on Zoom, and Kat was asking. We actually kind of touched upon Kat's comment there, asking if hard copies of a portfolio are passé. Kat's interested in galleries. So I would think, obviously, the pandemic notwithstanding, that that's the route you'd want to go. If you're trying to get in galleries, you want
Yeah,
your work to be seen in a tangible product.
I agree with that completely. If you're going to show work to galleries, they want to know what the quality of the print will be, especially because something on a screen can look so different than a print looks. What I have seen people do with galleries is have one or two prints at whatever size they want to exhibit. Like maybe your body of work you want to show it as 20 by 24. That's a lot to carry, like to bring in 20 by 20, 20 by 4s. Let's say 25, 20 by 24 so it doesn't all run together. That's a lot to carry. So maybe you bring in one or two and then 8 by 10s of the rest of it just so that they can see it. But everything I'm aware of and everybody I've talked to, something like that, they're going to want to see what the work looks like physically. What's the quality of the paper? What's the quality of the print?
Okay. And we had a good question coming from Kelvin on Facebook, asking what percentage of your time should you donate to pro bono stuff in the interest of furthering your careers? There's particular amount of time that you set aside doing stuff for free that is you're hoping that is going to pay dividends in the future, or do you kind of take it on an as needed basis?
It's on an as needed basis. And I would say, assuming that pro bono work is going to lead to other work is not always, it's often not going to happen. What I usually will do is I'll do a discounted rate for companies that for like nonprofits, for example, that I support. There are times where things merit pro bono work, but a lot of nonprofits have budgets, and it's not that you shouldn't support them necessarily, but everybody else is making money. You're using time and effort. You certainly shouldn't be out of pocket. I wouldn't do a project where it cost me $1,000 to produce it for free. But if it was an organization I really supported, I might not charge them if they covered expenses or if I had no expenses. Um, but I don't have a specific number, and I would only do it for organizations whose mission you really, really support. Don't do it for an organization that you don't care about just because you think it will lead to work. Do it for an organization you actually care about so that you don't care if it leads to work.
Definitely. I agree with that. And I think you got to get over the hump of, every loss is going to be damaging. Everybody's going to take some lumps. Everyone's going to take some bruises along the way as you kind of figure out, even the best get burned sometimes. They take a job that, they might have been able to get a lot more money for, and they take a loss on it, or they thought it was going to work out to be something and it didn't. So,
All the time.
it's gonna happen. It's gonna
Yep.
happen regardless of who you are, how big you are. But I think, like you alluded to, do your research, and if it's something that you feel good about, if you do take a loss or if you don't make anything out of it, you're not going to be. You can at least get something out of it in the end.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
we have a question from Rob on live stream, he does a lot of work for charities and nonprofits. Do you recommend he's looking for advice on how to get more of those clients? Do you recommend just going to the charities or the nonprofits and just reaching out and asking in what capacity they hire or?
Yeah, I mean, I think most nonprofits, except for the tiny, tiny ones, have somebody in marketing. They also have somebody in development, which is usually grant writing. That's not typically not the person to talk to, but they almost always have a marketing person and just reach out to that person. Sometimes their budgets are really low. There's a nonprofit I shoot for that I've worked for, I don't know, 7 or 8 years. The first year they called me, their budget for photography for the year was $1,500 total. I still give them a discount when I work for them now. I give them a very discounted rate, but I'm not doing a year's worth of work for $1,500. It's so sometimes there's some education and you have to decide what makes sense. But yeah, just find the marketing people. Any nonprofit that's large enough to hire you, I would expect to have a marketing person, even if they're not full time.
And this is also going to hinge upon where you're at in your career, correct? I mean, someone like you is going to have a completely different outlook than someone who's just trying to break in and is going to take more of a risk as far as taking lesser paid jobs, right?
Sure. I mean, you do next week. We're going to talk about pricing and estimating. Um, you do want to be careful to not take so little money that you're not making any money, and that's an easy thing to do at the beginning. But yeah, everybody's first of all, everybody's situation is different. Maybe this somebody can work for $200 a day, but somebody else can't work for less than $2,000 a day. It just depends on where you're at. Um, some of that's where you're at in your career, but some of it's just where you're at in life. You
Yeah.
know, maybe you have no expenses, and so you can work cheaply. I'd still be careful with that, but yeah, every situation is different for sure.
So many layers to it. It's like, you have, like you said, where you're at in your career, where you're at in your life. There's the industry at large to worry about because you always see the conversation pop up in forums of, is this undercutting the rest of the industry? Are you doing, or even with yourself, are you, cutting off your nose to spite your face? You charge them this amount now, and now you can't come back 6 months later and say, well, my rate is
Yeah,
this when you already told them it was that. So it's tough line to dance.
absolutely.
Kat is asking, would you suggest having the large print framed, matted, or just the print in presenting for gallery in particular?
I would suggest the print only. Some galleries want you to mat it and frame it, but some of them will do it themselves. And so you don't want to, for example, show up with a mat and a frame that to them looks less than ideal, and so that reflects on you. Just I would just show up with the print.
I want to thank you again, Tony, for joining us time and time again, always bringing us information. It's always a pleasure to have you on. Special thank you to our sponsor for today's event, Sony. For the rest of us here at the event space, we'll see you tomorrow. Take care, everyone.